And now it's time for Healing from Within with your host, Tony Valen.
Welcome to Healing from Within. I'm your host, Tony Valen. You can contact me, tony@tonyvalen.com. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow us on Twitter @TVHFW. Joining us on today's show is internationally renowned psychic channel, intuitive astrologer, and soul coach, teacher, and author, Sandy Anastasi. You can learn more about Sandy at sandyanastasi.com. Sandy Anastasi on Facebook, and follow her on Twitter @SandyAnastasi. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony. It's great to be here.
So let's get started. Can you tell us about the gifts that you have and when your journey started?
Oh, boy. That's, as with every psychic, Tony, that's a convoluted question. I think most psychics will say, when you say, when did your journey start? They'll say, well, I've been psychic all my life. And I would have to say I have been psychic all of my life. But I'm also one of those people that really only awakened consciously to those psychic abilities when I was in my late 20s. So I can track my experience as a developing psychic back to when I was a young child. When I was a young child, I saw auras. I would see the bubbles around people walking down the street. I could see through walls. I would look through the wall and see the beams. I left my body. I astral traveled. Now, these, of course, are all psychic things. But as a child, I assumed everybody did them. So I never thought of them as psychic. It actually wasn't until I was in my late 20s and I had a psychic opening that really expanded my psychic abilities in a major way, where I was actually hearing people's thoughts and seeing the aura where I actually couldn't overlook it. It was right there in my face. And at that point, I recognized I could look back and I could say, okay, I really had these things unfolding all of my life, but hadn't given any credibility to them. So I had that awakening. And that's the reason why I do teach psychic abilities right now. I teach psychic development, and I teach people to open and unfold their own abilities. And I do recognize that most people are psychic and don't realize it.
Wow, yeah. I introduced you as a psychic channel. Can you please tell the listeners what a psychic channel, what that means?
Well, if you can, let me describe how it would look if you saw it with your physical eyes. When someone is channeling as a psychic channel, if you looked at them, what you would see would be like a golden column of light coming down into the top of their head. We call that the crown center. And then you would see their whole body standing in what would appear to be a tube of light. And that really is a physically descriptive term in terms of what happens when somebody is in that psychic channel. All of the really good psychics on the planet today are psychic channels. A lot of them will say, I'm a psychic medium, or I'm a psychic channel, or I talk to angels. But the very best psychics are all psychic channels because they're making the connection to their guides through that channel before they're making their connection to people from the other side or getting future information for you or any information that you can get as a straight psychic. So it's not unique to me. That's actually something that happens along the way to your development as a psychic.
Understand. So when you talk to the other side, let's say to loved ones on the other side, do you connect to your higher self first, connect directly to them? What's the process?
That's interesting. It's a good question, Tony. And this is one of the big things that makes my teaching system, the Anastasi system of psychic development, different than what many mediums teach. Many of the spiritualist churches, for example, will teach you to connect directly to the person on the other side. I don't. I teach you to go up into that channel to make the connection to your higher consciousness through the channel first, and then to reach out, think of it as sideways outside of that channel to see who on the other side is kind of floating around wanting to get a message. And by doing it that way, what I'm actually doing is creating a safety zone for the people who are doing the readings, for the people I'm teaching to channel and teaching to be mediums, And I'm also giving them the ability to reach a higher level of people on the other side. Mediums who are taught to just reach out directly are actually being taught to reach out, and this can actually be dangerous, Tony. They're actually being taught to reach out with their telepathy. I'm pointing to my third eye here. Or with their clairaudience. I'm pointing to my ears. Or with their clairsentience. This is using your empathy to connect directly. And those are what I call the lower psychic senses. And when I'm using those lower psychic senses to try to connect to spirit, I'm using something that's not meant to pierce the other planes. And inevitably what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on my head, on my psyche, on my brain. And frankly, you see psychics who are doing that, initially doing great readings. Somewhere down the road, their readings stop being so good. They often start making things up. And when pushed, they often have things like brain hemorrhages and brain aneurysms because they're asking their physical brain to do things it's not supposed to do. Your brain is not supposed to pierce the veil. You're supposed to go up through that channel and let your higher self, which is already on the other side of the veil, make that connection.
I understand. So you talk about our higher self. What exactly is the higher self? I've heard that term so many times. What is that? Is that like an alter ego that we have on the other side? I don't understand.
Far more than an alter ego. Think of an alter ego as just another physical part of yourself. It's who you might want to be, or a person that you see as, wow, I could be this if I wanted to. An alter ego, and from the point of view of a psychologist, would be a suit of clothes you put on to become somebody different to face the world. That's not your higher self at all. Your higher self, Tony, is the real you. It's the you that hasn't just lived this lifetime. It's the you that has lived 1,000 times before. It's the you that when you pass away sometime in the future, you will gradually re-merge with and bring all of your experiences from this life and countless other lives too. Your higher self is you, but it's you on a higher plane, and it's a you that's incarnated many, many times, and from your personal point of view is all-knowing, all-seeing. And now I also want to qualify that because your higher self is not the apex of creation either. It's not God. There are higher selves to your higher self. And I would ask your listeners who are curious about that to read the Seth material by Jane Roberts. Because Seth, who channeled himself through Jane Roberts, who's passed away now, gave tremendous insight into the higher self and where it comes from and how it's created and who it connects to. So it's not the apex, but from our point of view, you might almost think of the higher self as your soul. But from the higher self's point of view, there's something higher than it.
Understand.
Yeah.
Got it. And when you're making this connection, I've also heard many psychics and mediums talk about their spirit guide. What is the function of the spirit guide in the connection? What do they actually, how do they assist?
Well, I believe that we don't just have one spirit guide. I actually believe that there's an entire hierarchy of guides out there that works with each and every one of us. Incidentally, at the end of this month, if I might interject,
Please do.
I will be teaching, it's a online webinar, so any of your listeners online would be able to work with this on August 21st. It's an online webinar. I think it's at 8 o'clock Eastern time, and it's about meeting your higher self. And for those of your listeners who are interested in meeting their guides, I do have a CD MP3 on meeting your guides that's available on my website, sandyanastasi.com. So people who are interested in those things can find them there. Meanwhile, your question about guides. In my Seeing Beyond the Veil class, again, that's available both in person and online. I'm teaching it in Tampa at the, let's see, that's I think October 24th, if anybody's interested in traveling to Tampa in Florida. But what I teach is that we have an actual hierarchy of guides. So I believe that everyone is born with a life guide. That would be a guide that's been with you before birth, probably through other lifetimes, will continue with you all through your life and even into the next life. And that life guide is here to help to keep you on track. I believe that you have a protector guide. Likewise, that guide has been with you before birth, will be with you all through life and beyond this life, And that guide's purpose is to protect your soul while it's in this physicality. And what is it going to protect it from? That would vary from individual to individual, because we all have different challenges in life. So the job of the protector guide is to help you to stay on track relative to the channels or the challenges that you do, that you don't go off the deep end. Okay?
Okay.
And I also believe that we all have what we call an animal totem guide that has also been with us for lifetimes. And that's kind of an interesting guide because according to things that I have read, and I do believe this because I have myself got an animal totem guide, on this planet, none of us are young souls. We've all lived countless lifetimes. We've all had lifetimes where we were a participant in an Aboriginal culture, where we studied a religion or practiced a religion called totemism, where we'd get out there and we'd dance the dance of the particular animal we needed to go out and catch for the hunt. So we, during that time period, understood that all animals had spirits, and if we talked to the spirit of the animal, that animal spirit would help us to stay alive, would feed us, would help us how to know how to grow and how to evolve. Well, during that lifetime, we would have gone out on a vision quest. We would have met our animal totem guide, and we would have had that animal assigned to us. So whenever anybody wanted to have strength in our clan, we would do the wolf dance, and Tony would be the one who got to wear the wolf pelt and do the wolf dance because his totem animal would be the wolf. Well, that totem animal that we got from all the way back in those many lifetimes ago would still be with us on the other planes. So all of us will still carry that animal totem guide with us as well. Now, in addition to those three guides, you have your higher self. Some people, not all people, have an archangel or an angel. Archangels and angels aren't necessarily the same, but they're still in the angelic realm. I do not have an angel. I wish I had an angel. I guess I'm just not angelic. But I have read many, many people who have angels. And generally speaking, I think when someone has an angel, and this is just I'm not an expert on angels, but this is my feeling about it. When I read someone and I connect with their guides and the guide happens to be an angel, what I feel from that angel is a tremendous amount of power mixed with love, mixed with protection. And it's almost as if that person in their physical life has in some way earned the right to have that angel as a guide in this lifetime. So some people have that angel as an additional guide, some people don't. And that you just have to go to someone like me who connects with your guides to find out if you have one. Right. Now, in addition to that, there really is what I call a hierarchy of guides. And I like to equate that to, for example, in American business, there is a corporate structure where you'll usually have a chairman of the board or a president at the head, and then you have a board of directors beneath him, and then you have other people carrying things out, and so on, and it becomes pyramidal until you get to the bottom, which is where we are. Well, that structure of guides is like that. And at the top of your group of guides would be a guide who's the equivalent of the director of the board, and he would be the guide who is in charge of whatever ray that your energy, your psyche works on. And if your listeners want to learn about the rays and this whole hierarchy I'm talking about, I would direct them to Alice Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y, or it might be B-A-L-Y, I'm not sure. Okay. But it's Alice Bailey and all of her work. She wrote something like 20 novels. She wrote them in the early 1920s. They are groundbreaking. The place to start would be with a book called Ponder on This, which is a compendium of all of her novels. And it's heavy reading. It's not light stuff. But she's talking about things that probably won't be fully understood.
So would you say that people have different number of guides attached to them or working with them, or do we all have the same number of guides?
Well, we have the basic structure I've talked about. Within that structure, you and your listeners are aware that the universe is constructed of many planes. It's kind of like the layers of an onion. Every time you peel back another layer, there's another layer, another layer, another layer, and maybe that Godhead is down at the center, but there could be, 1,000 layers between us and God. you see?
Right.
We have dimensions, or think of it as maybe rungs on a ladder. Understanding that we have that dimensionality and many different planes of existence, you can have guides in that whole pyramidal hierarchy I'm talking about that exist on every single plane of existence. So you could sit down on the subway and have a very light conversation with the guy sitting next to you, and he happens to give you that one piece of information which you've been looking for the last 10 years that lets you know the direction in life you're supposed to be heading. That's happened to all of us.
Right.
And what that is in that moment, that living person for that 10 minutes became your guide. So we can have guides on the physical plane. We can have guides on the next plane up, which is what we call the lower astral. So you could have your great Aunt Mary come in to give you guidance, a hug, a little bit of love because she really cares about you. You could have a guide on the plane above that who comes in to give, that's the intellectual plane, who comes in to help you with a math problem or a particular thing you're trying to work through at work that you can't understand. So what happens is that your life guide, your protector guide, and your higher self will bring in whatever guidance you need to complete what you're working on in life. All you need to do is have focus, and the help is there.
Right.
And Tony, this has been such a tremendous boon to me personally, because, and I'm sure your listeners can relate to this, I've been through periods in my life where I really felt so alone. You know, nobody loved me. Nobody cared. I was out there, you know, on the end of the runway, ready to jump in the water, okay? And guess what? I never really was alone, because no matter how alone I felt physically, all I had to do was relax and listen. And there was always that guide whispering in my ear that was telling me the next place to go, the next thing to do, the emotional thing that I needed for support. So you see, if people would only listen to their own inner guidance, the support they need is always there. Nobody's ever alone.
You also talked about the different planes, and it's so funny because when I meditate, I understand what you mean, because I do see different planes, and it's like I see these huge beings of light, but they're like up there, and I hate to say this, but it's like they're snobby. They don't talk to me, and I ask them to talk to me, they won't. And every time, you know, I try to understand why they won't talk to me, they basically come back and say, because you're not ready. And so it's
and Tony, honestly, maybe you don't really want to be ready for that one.
Well, why? What is it?
I'm just laughing, tongue in cheek. I astral when I sleep. Astral traveling is you leave the body, you travel the other planes, and everybody does this while they sleep. The difference between me and a lot of people is I do it consciously. A lot of people just do it while they sleep. Mm-hmm. Well, one time I was out astraling, and I woke up on the astral, and I was on a stage, and I love to dance, so I was playing, and I was doing ballet, and I was doing all these things I can't really do in the real life, you know. But I was just having my grand time out there on the stage, on the astral, and I realized that I was in a place I shouldn't be when a young man wearing a military uniform, holding a clipboard, came walking across the stage, and of course walked right through me. Because on the astral you have still many planes. He was on a different plane than I was. I could see him, but he couldn't see me, and we were both sleeping. And so he walked right through me with his clipboard, and I thought to myself, oh my God, this is a military place? And then I looked around, and I saw all these seats in front of me, and I realized I was in the Pentagon. And I was up on the stage where the speakers get, and I'm doing this crazy dance of ballet. And then one of these really super big guys, like you were talking about, you know, they're really, really big ones that come from a much higher plane than us. That's why they are so big. All of a sudden was there looking down at me, and I was about the size of your thumbnail, and this guide, physically speaking, if I were to describe him, was the size of the Empire State Building. And he's looking down and he's saying, oh, would you like to work with us here? And the only thing I could think was, no, I don't. And bam, just like that, I woke up. It was like this is not going to be my stage.
Oh,
Okay. So I do believe that there are some very highly exalted, I'm going to call them powers, guides, if you will, but on planes that are so much higher than us that we can barely even relate to them. And I do think that they get involved with the planet Earth and with our people, and I do believe they're helping to guide civilization, and they're helping to try to keep us alive through these changing times, which are so very tenuous because we really perch on a thread. We have a technology that, in the wrong hands, could destroy the entire planet in a blink of an eye, and yet if we can make our way past these times, we can enter a golden era that can last for thousands of years of perfection for everyone. And they are trying to help us do that. I believe that with all my heart.
I believe that too. What is, can you explain to us what your vision is? And I don't mean psychic vision. I mean, like, what do you want to accomplish in this world in your life?
Tony, there are two me's. And I'm sure most people in my position have the same thing. There are two me's. The me that is the little Sandy, the one who is the normal, ordinary, everyday person, that person just wants to hang out with family and friends and have a good life. No different from everybody else. The me that my guides are working through, that I have been following and working with for so many, many years, that me is connected to my higher self. And that me wants to help to create the experience that every man, every woman, and every child that's on the face of planet Earth has been able to open and recognize our psychic abilities. That we're able to not just recognize them, but to use them and to control them and to move into that next level of being where we see ourselves, we really see ourselves and know ourselves to be more than our physical bodies. And really, when all of us have accepted that, Tony, there's not going to be any more war. How can there be war when people can talk mind to mind?
No.
How can there be war when I can empathize with you and really understand where you're coming from? Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
So, you know, when we open those doors, when we really are connected on all those different realms that your opening of your psychic senses can do for you, we're all one people. We're moving in the direction of real enlightenment. So that's my purpose. That's why I developed the Anastasi system of psychic development. It's so that gradually we can move that experience of being able to utilize our psychic senses. I want everybody to be able to see the world through the eyes that I see the world with.
Understanding. And actually, that leads right into my next question. Can you tell us a little more detail about the Anastasi system of psychic development? I mean, like the different stages and what you teach.
Yeah, well, it actually, the way I set it up is that it consists of 6 different series. I teach each one of the series in a weekend immersion workshop. Some of the teachers, I've certified a lot of people to teach. Some of the teachers teach it on weeknights, so it takes a little bit longer to go through because it's 2 hours a week. So it can be done in different ways. I also have it online as a Blu-ray, as a CD, as an MP3, so people all over the world can study it if they're interested in it. What it does is it takes people from the level 1, that is setting a foundation, teaching you how to utilize your telepathy, your empathy, all of your psychic senses that mirror your 5 physical senses. It teaches you how to balance the right and left hemispheres of the brain and make that connection to the higher self. And I think most of all, level 1 teaches you how to differentiate yourself from the people in the world around you so that you become whole within yourself. Level 2 has to do with energy and auras. It's working with being able to do a health scan in the aura, see the aura, read the aura. It's all about energy. The energy interchange of people. What is a psychic vampire? How to keep the integrity of your own energy. How to feel where your thoughts are leading. How to be able to recognize the ebb and flow of energy around you. Level 3 I call tools and toys. And level 3 is all about literally the toys we play with in the psychic field. It's everything from crystal gazing to automatic writing. to astral travel. And in level 3, we meet our guides. Then in level 4, I introduce mediumship, and I also teach people how to channel, how to open that channel I talked about when we first started conversing this evening.
Right.
And level 5 is opening and expanding your abilities, and level 6, believe it or not, is using mediumship to heal both people in spirit and people in the physical world, which a lot of people don't realize is possible, but it's entirely possible to do that.
And I think that's a beautiful gift that you can give someone. 'Cause that's like unconditional loving, you know, and that's what I think the soul's after anyways.
It really is, yeah.
You also do past life readings?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And tarot and astrology. What is the process for each of those?
Well, interestingly enough, I started out doing past life readings, literally laying people down on a couch and using a form of guided meditation to regress them. So I do that, but not in person any longer. Now what I do is I work with the tarot cards to take people through a succession of lifetimes, looking at where a karmic pattern first began, and then taking them through this succession of lifetimes as they worked on it to the present lifetime. So it'll take the primary karmic pattern you've got right now and go back to its root and track it. And we can identify people you've connected with, why you're having these particular issues. You can get to the root of a lot of interesting things there. So that's what that past life tarot reading is.
Okay. So the past life readings, tarot, is basically the same like technique, or I don't even know how to, how to ask you the correct question. The past life reading tarot is the same method, or?
No, two entirely different things.
Okay.
When a past life regression therapist lays you down on a couch, nothing to do with tarot cards at all. It's like a form of hypnosis is what it feels like. Okay? When I do it with the tarot cards, you don't have to be physically present. I can do this with you over the phone. I can do this with you on Skype. This is why I've moved into that. And also, I think for what I do, it has more value because I'm helping people to work through a whole pattern that they could have been working on for lifetimes. Whereas in a past life regression with a therapist, you're only looking at one lifetime. So what I'm going to do with your readers is that or your listeners, if that interests them, they really need to find in their locality a regression therapist that they can go to and actually get a one-on-one session with. And if that connects with them, then get the tarot reading that shows them the whole succession of lifetimes that has them working on one particular problem, one particular challenge.
Wow. Okay. Another technique that's interesting is the after-death chart. Can you tell us about that?
That's fascinating to me. Tony, at the moment of death, you're also having a moment of birth. Because as Abraham says, and I'm quoting Esther Hicks, Abraham, not Abraham.
Okay.
As Abraham says, there is no death. You're alive here, and then you're alive there. Well, the death chart here is the birth chart there. And both myself and my guides are astrologers.
Okay.
That's one of the things, I guess, that makes me a little bit unique in the channeling world, is that my guides are all astrologers. So I open a book we call an ephemeris as a channel, and I'm reading you right out of that ephemeris. I mean, it's literally like I'm reading your life out of a bunch of numbers because my guides have that knowledge to be able to do that.
Right.
Well, when I'm working with a after-death chart, what I'm doing is I actually work with a series of charts. The first chart is the death chart of the person who passed. And that death chart here is the birth chart there. So with the help of my guides, I can track where your loved one is on the other side. What are they doing? Are they with you? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Are they working on relationship issues out there? Do they have a job? Maybe they're helping souls to cross over, or maybe they're traveling the universe, they're exploring. And we can see that in their after-death chart. We can also look at the time of death in the charts of the living people who were close to the one who died. And we can tell how the impact of that death is affecting each one of you. And we can also tell if that person who passed is still involved with you, and if so, how. Because many people who pass remain to be guides for the people they loved. And we can actually see if that's the case or not.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And so with this chart, are you also able to, and you're talking about the charts, doing them for the people that have passed on. What about, can this chart work for someone that is still here? I mean, in other words, what I'm asking is, can you tell when someone's going to die?
Oh, good question. You know, that is the age-old question. And the answer to that is from astrology, Tony, if I'm only reading you, I cannot see from your chart when you're going to pass. What I can see in your chart is if you're going to get sick, how long that illness would last. I can even be pretty close to what kind of illness it is, when it's going to happen, when it's going to be gone or not. Is it going to be life-threatening or not? I can see all those things. But if you're actually going to die, I can't tell. I could see the accident in your chart, but are you going to die from it? I can't tell. However, if I look at all of your family's charts, your mother's chart would show death of a son. Your father's chart would show death of a son. Your sister's chart would show death of a brother. See what I'm getting at?
Yes.
So if I look at the charts of the family around you, through them I can see that this life-threatening thing you're going through means you're going to die.
Yeah.
But if I only have your chart, I can't tell. Because you see, you don't see yourself gone. You just see yourself going through a transition because you're not gone. You just move into some other dimension.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah. So, this is all done with astrology. So, let me ask you a question just popped into my head because I know that this also comes as a question to me from many people: is can astrology tell? Well, do people put bad spells on you or give you bad luck? And if that does exist, the first question is, does it exist? Does it not? And if it does exist, can astrology tell you whether you're possessed or not, or, someone has done something bad to you?
That's an interesting question. In astrology, I'm laughing, Tony, because not only is it an interesting question, but if it is a yes, man, I'm in trouble. In astrology, the house of hidden enemies is the 12th house. And you're talking to somebody whose sun, moon, Venus, part of fortune are intercepted in their 12th house. Like whammy, 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 whammy. So if this is the case, man, I came into life whammied, So I have to tell you, I don't believe that because I really don't see myself as whammied. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So there's an answer there. So I think that when they talk about the house of hidden enemies in astrology, what they're really talking about is that if you don't face yourself, your own demons, if you don't face your own fears, those things within you can become your enemy. The enemy isn't outside of yourself, the enemy is you. Right. And that's really what that astrological 12th house is. Now, in answer to your other question, do people, and I wish I could say this isn't true, do people go to some professed magic user and say, I want to put a spell on so-and-so? Unfortunately, they do. There are magazines filled with people who say, do you have somebody you don't like? I'll be glad to put a curse on them for you. On the other hand, those curses are not really going to work. Okay? The only way a negative projection is going to work on another human being is if you can convince the other human being that it's going to work.
I agree.
You get it?
I absolutely do.
So, if I just don't believe in this stuff, bam, bounces off me like it was never even there. Okay? Because there's no place to let it in. So the first thing that your listeners need to recognize is that nothing gets into them that they don't invite in. And this is one big reason why it's so important always to face your fears. Oh. And to not allow another person to abuse you or to intimidate you or in any way to get over on you. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and put on your boxing gloves and beat the world up, but you certainly should be defending yourself and saying, no, I'm not going to be afraid of you just because you think you're bigger than me, because you're not.
Right.
Okay? And people need to have that sense of self that allows them to say that. And that's both on the physical plane. That's the way to stop bullying. Right. Nobody bullies somebody who stands up and says, for God's sake, get real. You keep that up, and I'm going to tell your mother, and then I'm going to tell the principal, and then you're going to get kicked out of school. Well, that kid doesn't get bullied. The one who gets bullied is the one who is afraid, is hiding in the corner, the one who has that fear base. So there's an old saying, I love that movie where they said fear is the mind killer. Remember that movie? Well, and I've heard that saying so often all over the internet and every place else. Fear is the mind killer. There's nothing really to fear except fear itself.
Yeah.
And that's true.
And I agree with that. This is Tony Valen with Healing From Within. You can contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow us on Twitter at TVHFW. We're talking to our guest, internationally renowned psychic channel, intuitive astrologer, soul coach, teacher, and author, Sandy Anastasi. You can learn more about Sandy at SandyAnastasi.com, Sandy Anastasi on Facebook, and follow her on Twitter at Sandy Anastasi. Sandy, I introduced you also as an author, and you've written many books, and the listeners can go to your website, SandyAnastasi.com, to learn all about the books. Can you, a complete list of the books, can you give us an idea of a book that intrigued me, Astrology, Art, and Science?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Well, first of all, the original version of that book was written in 1979. And it was written as a text to support astrology classes I was teaching at the time, because there really was no text available at the time that would support what I was teaching. So I wrote it, and I would be copying it on a copy machine and putting it in a loose leaf binder and giving it to my students. I recently came across a young man whose mother had studied with me in 1979. And he's now a well-known astrologer. He's got his own radio show. He's doing great. And he learned astrology from that loose leaf manual sitting on his coffee table in his mother's living room. Wow. So it made me feel really, really good.
Absolutely.
But I came across him at the same time that the modern-day, updated, final version of this book, Astrology, Art, and Science, finally was published. It was published by Balboa Press last year, at the very tail end of 2013. And it's really just now picking up speed. This fall, I'm going to be teaching my very first beginner-level astrology class online. So anyone in the whole world now can study with me, and that book is the textbook. So it's near and dear to my heart. And Tony, what it does is it really goes into the psychological foundation of every planet, every sign, and every house. You see, it's my belief that if you know that you're whatever sign you are, like I'm a Gemini, if you know that the components that create a Gemini, that make a Gemini that Gemini type of personality, if you understand the foundation, the roots, the family structure, the interaction with mom and dad that produced that personality, well, you can expand that and understand so much else about every single Gemini you meet. So what happens is by studying this material, you end up getting along better with a whole lot of people. For example, what sign are you?
I'm a Leo.
Okay, so as a Leo, you were raised by parents who took a lot of pride in you. And when you did something beautiful, they gave you very wide open praise. They were really proud of you, and they let you know that. And so you learn to respond to that praise and that pride. And you take pride in all of the work that you do, and you always will. Now, suppose we decided to take you, the Leo, and put you into a relationship with a friend who's a Virgo. Now, if somebody is born into a family where they're born a Virgo, they're brought up with criticism. They're brought up to constantly look at everything they're doing and question whether it's being done right. How good is it? Did they jump high enough? You see, it's almost the exact opposite of what you were brought up with. So if you enter into this relationship with this Virgo person, there you are performing for them, trying to make them feel happy and take pride in you. And instead of saying, gee, you did this wonderful job, they're saying, you know, it would be so much better if you did it over here instead of over there. Or maybe you should wear blue when you do that instead of black. And after a while, you're sitting there saying, do they even care about me? And meanwhile, they're actually showing their caring through their criticism.
Right. Because that's natural to them.
Of course. So the real purpose in my book is to help people to get along better with each other everywhere and to understand that they're different because they're supposed to be different. I.e., it takes all kinds to make a world.
That's interesting. I guess that would help you understand the other person, and you can't take things personally when they say something to you because that may be the only thing they know. And in their mind, they're doing a good thing, but in your mind, they're ripping you to shreds.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So that class I'm going to be teaching is in September, and if you don't mind, I'd like to give the date on it.
Absolutely.
It's going to be an 8-week class, and it starts on September 2nd at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. So if anybody's interested, they can go to my website, www.cndanastasi.com, and get all the information about how to register.
Wonderful. Under the events tab, right?
Yes, under the events tab.
And the reason I say that is because when I go to your website and I look for stuff, I didn't know where to look until I asked your assistant,
there are
Lisa.
tabs.
Yeah, she said, go to the events tab.
Yes.
And it's online.
It's online.
So
this webinar is online. I'm trying, Tony, to get into teaching more things online. For me, the inner press from my guides is to do it faster, teach more people, which is interesting because, of course, they never tell me why. They just tell me what. But the fact that they want me to reach more people faster, and, of course, the Internet coming of age has made that possible, which is great.
Yes, yes.
But you see, that tells me that we are definitely approaching a meltdown point, where it's important that the word gets out. And not just from me, but from so many other people, which is why I'm glad that you're doing the show that you're doing, and you're connecting with so many people who touch so many people. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and this in some way gives me deep satisfaction. I can't explain it. I just get such a... I could do this all night long and be happy, you know. It's not like a job. It's just that I love doing it. You also wrote another book, Tarot Reader's Workbook. Can you tell us about that book?
What do you want to know about that book?
What does it actually tell people about tarot? I mean, when you teach it, you basically touched on tarot, but when you're teaching it as a teacher to a student, what are you trying to bring across to the students?
Well, that tarot book, it's a complete tarot instruction book. It's going to teach you the meanings of all the cards, both upright and inverted, and it's going to teach you how to interconnect them in a Celtic cross reading. And I teach that reading because it gives timing of events. So by the time you're done getting that book under your belt, you're going to be a tarot reader. So it is a complete course in tarot. Now, you can hone that by learning other spreads, by learning more information. I mean, any of these things that we talk about are lifelong studies. I know people who've been studying tarot all of their life, but that book is not only a good place for the beginner to start, it's a good place for experienced people to go back and get more understanding of how the interrelationship of the cards can make sense. For example, if I have a card that says you're opening a business, and I have another card that shows money's a problem, I'm going to know when I put the meanings of both of those cards together that you're opening a business and money's going to be a problem, so I'm going to need to advise my client that they have to be very frugal with where they put their dollars. You see?
Yes.
So it's the blending of the meanings of the cards, and that's something most tarot books don't give, and this one does. My book's also, I gotta say, it's a teeny little bit famous. You'll see when you go on my website, I have a clip on there that is me reading Whoopi Goldberg on The View. And I've got to say, I was invited on there a few years back, And it was so much fun. I just had a real blast. Those ladies are a real hoot, and it was an incredible honor for me because Whoopi Goldberg was my idol. I mean, ever since she was did her guest appearances on Star Trek way back when, she's been like, you know, up there on a pedestal. So when I got to actually meet her, it was really special. Wow. At any rate, when I wrote this book, I got invited on to The View to do a tarot reading for her, and of course they had some fun with it, and it was just a very special time for me. And there are a lot of my tarot books floating around because when I did that appearance, I gave the books out to the audience. Oh. And of course, a lot of those people didn't want the books, so they just passed it along. Oh, really? Well, they were an audience watching The View, you know, so those books have found their way probably around the world a couple of times. They come back to me, people say, hey, I have your book, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Anyway, I'm proud of that book. I also want you to know that all of my books, except for that book, have been channeled. So I've written a lot of books. I wrote the entire Anastasi system of psychic development. It's a series of books. I wrote the Kabbalah workbook. I wrote the Art and Science of Astrology. I'm working right now on the 6th book of the Anastasi system of psychic development, so that'll totally complete that series. And I've got more books in the works. I'm someone who likes to write. But all of my books are channeled. My guides come in, bam, I get moving, and those books just flow. But the Tarot Reader's Workbook, they refused to help with.
Interesting.
You see, they said, it's time to write the Anastasi system of psychic development. And I said, that is awfully egotistical. That's my name. And they said, so what? It begins with A. People will find it very quickly. And besides that, in 300 years, people will think it was the Anastasi Indians and they will have forgotten you. So it's fine. And I said, okay, so maybe it's not so egotistical, but I still think it's more important to write tarot. And they said, okay, write it. And they disappeared for about 2 years while I really, really worked my rear end off writing that tarot book. So my tarot book is my book. All of the others are my guides.
Very interesting. You used the term Kabbalah. What is Kabbalah? What does that mean?
That's another really big question. Tony, the Kabbalah goes all the way back into the distant roots of Judaism, around the time that they came out of Egypt. The Jews will say that the Kabbalah belongs to them, but around the early part of the 1900s, a tradition of Kabbalah called the Western Mystery Tradition of Kabbalah came out, the Western tradition, and that tradition takes the Kabbalah out of Judaism and says this belongs to everyone. So I teach the mystical Kabbalah as opposed to the Judaic Kabbalah. That's important for your listeners to understand. Okay. The Kabbalah originally was a word of mouth tradition. It was not even in writing. And today it was secret. It was a secret tradition. And it talked about how energy becomes matter. Oh. And you had to really be way high up in the Jewish religion before they would even teach it to you. There are stories about rabbis floating above the floor and talking to each other telepathically. I don't know how true those stories are, but I do know that the Kabbalah teaches us how to bring our energy up out of matter. It is a spiritual tradition that really promotes evolution, which is why I teach it. Today, there are thousands of books written on the Kabbalah. So it went from a totally verbal tradition to a tradition where in the Hebrew tradition, there are thousands of books. And in the Western mystery or mystical tradition, there are maybe 20 or 30 books that I could tell you about. It's gotten big. Now, the way I teach it is through a guided visualization process. And I'm only one of a very small handful of teachers who do that. So I do have a tape on my website that teaches it in a more traditional fashion, which is like a classroom learning. But on my website for free, I have all of the paths as journeys that you can close your eyes and listen to. And you see it unfold behind your eyes. Any one of your listeners can go on there and click and do the paths. You would start with the first path, which actually is path 32, and work all the way down to path 10. It's interesting. It goes backwards until you get to the top of the tree, which is creation. And I do teach an online class on the Kabbalah as well. I run it once or twice a year, and it runs for about 6 months, and it's very limited in the numbers of people that I can have in that class. Right. And what it does, you still listen to the path online, but I discuss how it's affecting your life with you in the actual class.
Very interesting. Under the philosophy section of your website, you also have an audio class titled Seeing Behind the Veil.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? And it's what happens after death, right?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I'll be teaching that class in Tampa coming up on October 24th. It's an all-day workshop. It's a Friday. So anyone who wants to take it in person, you can. In Seeing Beyond the Veil, I'm talking about what is on the other side of the veil. So we talk about what happens to the spirit, what happens to the soul when it leaves the body at death, what happens to the body after death. We talk about the incarnation of the soul. Where does it come from? How does it form this stuff around it to create this physical body on the physical plane? We talk about your guides and the hierarchy of guides. We talk about your higher self and where it lies in the scheme of creation. We also talk about the archangelic realm. We talk about things like fairies and things that maybe in the Findhorn community they're more familiar with than most of the rest of us, where they actually look at little non-physical beings that can help to augment the growth of plants, etc., etc. We get into all of that stuff in Seeing Beyond the Veil. The world, the universe is far bigger than we think it is, and that is what we talk about in that class.
Very interesting. You also have an audio class, and this is something that most people don't talk about, especially Americans. It has to do with sex and energy. Can you tell us a little about, share your thoughts about that class and that subject?
Well, if your listeners get onto my mailing list on my website, sandyanastasi.com, just click on newsletter and click join and get on there. Periodically, I do teach that as an online class. So this is an opportunity to get in there where you can actually ask questions of me. What I do in that class, and I do have it as an MP3 and I have it as a CD, so and I also did that class online months ago, and that is going to eventually be available as a downloadable. The thing is, what I'm doing in that class is really explaining the interaction energetically between people when they have a sexual experience. What attracts people to each other, what creates discord in the relationships, why certain people can always attract the same type of partner over and over and over again, why somebody should choose to be born into a body in which they feel that they're the wrong sex. We touch upon all of those things, and all of a sudden it starts to make sense, because that whole interaction of the male and female energies is not necessarily man and woman. It's male generative, female receptive, and what we end up doing is talking about what brings us together and what happens in that sexual interchange. For example, one thing I'll leave your listeners with, in every single sexual act, something's created. Period. Something's always created. It's not always a baby, but something's created. So everybody can think about that a little bit tonight as they go to sleep in the loving arms of their partner.
Right. The one final audio class that I want to ask you about that piqued my interest is the myth of Atlantis. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, obviously it piqued my interest too. Edgar Cayce said that Atlantis was rising, that we were going to find it again. And I think maybe that's why it really piqued my interest way back when. I'm an avid admirer of Edgar Cayce. Well, I did in that class, it's available on my website as a CD downloadable and an MP3. And what I did was a lot of research. It's not a class based on conjecture or, this is my belief. It's a class that's based on research. And based on the research, Atlantis is probably located in the middle of the Pacific, off the coast of Florida, between Florida and Africa. in that big, vast area. And indeed, there have been steps discovered, but that's also one of the deepest oceans on the planet. So it's going to be interesting to see if Atlantis does rise the way Edgar Cayce seems to think it will, because that would certainly create some chaos on our many continents if it did.
Wow.
It would mean Earth changes. So we'll see. But I didn't just research the location of it. I also researched whatever I could find out about the culture. And a very well-known hypnotherapist named Dick Sutphin did an enormous amount of past life regressions on people, thousands of them. And in every one of those past life regressions of people in the United States, he found at least one lifetime in Atlantis. And what this led him to believe is that most Americans and most people in the technologically developed world have lived in Atlantis because Atlantis was technologically advanced. And here we are again. And that, of course, brings up the concept of, well, here we are again. What are we going to do with it this time?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there any other subject you would like to talk about, Sandy? We've covered a lot of material.
We have. I think we've really come to, full circle with a whole lot of different things. The only thing I really would like to add is that I'm going to go back to the whole concept of people recognizing that energy is real. We don't just live in a physical world. We live in a world of energy. When you have a strong emotional reaction to something, you're sending out an energy of attraction towards that thing. It's a really good reason for people to understand that if you're smart, you want to be emotional about things that are good for you, not bad for you. Because emotion is the battery that powers the creation or the reality in your life that you are creating. Right. So what you want, you definitely want to put emotion behind, but you don't want to put a bad emotion behind it, because otherwise you're going to think you're moving in the direction of what you want, and you're going to take a right-hand turn and end up with exactly what you don't want.
Our thanks to internationally renowned psychic channel, intuitive astrologer, soul coach, teacher, and author Sandy Anastasi. You can learn more about Sandy at sandyanastasi.com, Sandy Anastasi on Facebook, and follow her on Twitter at Sandy Anastasi. You are listening to Healing from Within with Tony Valen here on Blog Talk Radio, airing Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. Visit our website, healingfromwithin.net, or contact me directly, tony@tonyvalen.com. Please follow us on Twitter at TVHFW. Thank you so much. Love and light from all of us here at Healing from Within.